Assuming it's the same.
Yes.
Yeah, the defendants are all being brought up right now.
There were two other officers and then after and no one pretty much.
Okay, calling People versus James Crumbley, docket number 2100661, and People versus Jennifer Crumbley, docket number 2100662. Now appearances on the record, starting with prosecutor, please.
Karen McDonald, here on behalf of the people.
Thank you, Judge. Mark Keast on behalf of people.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Shannon Smith on behalf of Jennifer Crumbley.
Good morning, Your Honor. Marielle Lehman on behalf of James Crumbley.
Today's the date and time set for continuation of the preliminary examination. Are all parties ready to proceed?
Yes, Judge.
Yes, Your Honor.
We are, Your Honor. I have one minor matter to take up with the court, if you could, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. The last time we were here, we requested that the court allow our clients to be uncuffed, to allow them to more easily write and take notes and send us notes as we're doing our cross-examination and listening to witness testimony. The court left it up to the sheriff's office, and the last time we were here, one of the deputies indicated that they were not comfortable uncuffing either of our clients due to status. Your Honor, we're making that request again, that you allow them to at least uncuff one hand. I'm certain that the court watched the hearing in circuit court with the shooter in this case, or in the other case, and he was allowed to uncuff. So we're asking that the court or the sheriff's office allow our clients to at least uncuff one hand to allow them to more easily write notes. Also, if the court recalls, the last time we were here, there was an issue with the media zooming in or taking photographs of our clients' notes. So I would ask that the court allow them to uncuff at least one hand to allow our communication to be more easy.
Well, I'm going to defer to the sheriff's department at this point in time. Who's responsible for the?
Our policy is to leave them cuffed. As far as my call would be, that's the policy is to leave them cuffed.
Now, I don't know that you can cuff them to those chairs. Can you do one cuff to a chair?
Your Honor, in every hearing I've ever had, when a judge has said to uncuff the defendant, they've been uncuffed.
I understand that. This is a little bit different situation. I have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. So, there's been occasions in the past where I haven't allowed the defendant to be uncuffed, especially if I've had issues with them in terms of behavior or concerns regarding any security. So, at this point, I'm just gonna ask the deputy, is there an ability to cuff them to have one cuff to a chair so that they can write with the dominant hand?
If you are telling me to do that, I will do it.
Can you do that with these chairs is what I'm asking you?
I believe so.
Pardon me?
I believe so.
Okay, if you can, I will allow one cuff to the chair, one dominant hand for purposes of writing.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy.
Judge, before we begin testimony, I think it's important to bring up the potential conflict issue.
Go ahead. In terms of, at every hearing, the court has reiterated with both counsel and with the defendants relative to potential conflict of interest due to the fact that these defendants are co-defendants. Both attorneys are from the same law firm. At the last hearing, the attorneys indicated for purposes of alleviating to a certain extent that conflict, that each attorney would only be representing each one of the defendants. I just want to make sure that the defendants are still okay with that process, so I'm going to start with Mr. James Crumbley. Mr. Crumbley, you understand that potential conflict of interest exists in this case as it relates to your attorneys representing both of you because the attorneys are from the same law firm. Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
And do you understand that your interest in terms of you being co-defendants could be disparate at some point in time during the course of these proceedings, and a conflict may arise? Do you understand that?
Yes, Your Honor.
And at this point in time, are you willing to waive that potential conflict of interest and continue with your attorney, which is Ms. Lehman?
Yes, Your Honor.
And Ms. Crumbley, do you also understand the potential conflict of interest as it relates to your representation with Ms. Smith, because Ms. Smith and Ms. Lehman are from the same law firm, and that you potentially have disparate interests when it comes to your co-defendant?
Yes, Your Honor.
And at this point in time, are you willing to waive that conflict?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you want to proceed with Ms. Smith being your counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Judge, the only thing I would add is that, as was apparent from the February 8th hearing, there's separate evidence as to each defendant, so I just want that made clear, that each defendant knows that there's separate evidence to each defendant, and waive in that respect as well.
Do you both understand that, Mrs. Crumbley? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Crumbley?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge.
Let's go ahead and continue. When we broke last time, Detective Bobrowski was on the stand.
Yes, Judge, he's here in the hallway. And Judge, for the record, I did email both defense counsel the day after the preliminary examination, provided step-by-step instructions on how a layperson would be able to go through a Cellbrite reader report and export certain data extractions. So I think we're on the same page there.
And Your Honor, not only did they do that, but they also provided us with a file that had all of the text. So we appreciate that and thank you.
Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear any testimony you're going to give will be the truth under the penalty of perjury.
Yes, ma'am.
You have a seat, please. We're going to go ahead and continue with the cross-examination. Detective Smith.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Let's see here, the last time we were here, the prosecution, introduced and admitted several exhibits through your testimony. I want to go back and ask you a couple of questions about some of those exhibits. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
And if there's an exhibit you need to see or need me to bring up to you, please let me know and I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna start with the prosecution's exhibit number 9, which was an audio recording we listened to with Miss Pam Fine that was left for Jennifer Crumbley. Do you recall that
Yes, ma'am.
message? Okay. And in that message, Miss Fine discusses how Ethan was seen looking at bullets during class time.
Okay. Yes.
And she discusses how guns may be a hobby and there's nothing wrong with that, correct?
Correct.
And ultimately, she says, you can call me back, otherwise have a great holiday. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
From listening to that voicemail, there was no request or demand that Jennifer Crumbley call Miss Fine back.
Correct.
Okay, so in the media, there has been statements about Ms. Crumbley received a phone call or a message and did not respond to it. That message did not require a response, the one with Ms. Fine, is that correct?
If I'm gonna object to the form of question right now, he's not here to testify to what was reported in the media. He can testify to what was actually extracted from the cell phones. He's a fact witness.
So your objection is
It's improper questioning for this witness, Judge.
form,
Yes, Judge.
response?
Your Honor, the witness testified extensively about what was in the recording. I'm just asking a question about the recording.
You can rephrase the question so that it complies with the initial rules of evidence.
The exhibit with the voicemail did not require or even ask for a call back from Ms. Crumbley, correct?
Correct.
In the voicemail, there was additionally no request for the parents to do anything specific with respect to their son, correct?
Correct.
And when you reviewed text messages between Ethan and his mother, there was a conversation that was admitted as Exhibit 10 about that voicemail, correct?
Correct.
And like I said, if you don't recall the exhibit, just let me know. In the text exchange between Jennifer Crumbley and Ethan, Jennifer texts over to him. I'm sorry, here I got it. Okay. Her text starts off, seriously looking up bullets in school, question mark, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And Ethan provides an answer to her about what he was doing.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I said Ethan provides an answer about what he was looking up.
I believe, can I see a copy of that? I just want to make sure.
Sure.
Okay, you originally retained the original exhibits that were admitted into evidence, so I believe the prosecutor has the original ones.
Would you like me to use the marked copy?
I would.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
ma'am. Okay, I'm sorry, what was your question?
My question was just that there was a conversation between Ethan and Jennifer about what he was doing at school, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And Ethan is providing explanations, that it was completely harmless, correct?
That's what the text message says, yes, ma'am.
And, Jennifer tells him that they left a voicemail about the incident.
Correct,
And Ethan explains how he doesn't want to get in trouble and gives a little more explanation about why he was looking at bullets.
correct,
He says things like it was a harmless act. Teachers give me no privacy, things along those lines, correct?
correct, yes, ma'am.
And based on the text, you can also see that Ethan wanted to hear the voicemail when he got home, and Jennifer said, I saved it, meaning she saved the voicemail. Is that your understanding of that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, continuing on through that exhibit, Ms. Crumbley is saying things to Ethan along the lines of, are you okay? You know you can talk to us, we won't judge you, things along those lines, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Can you
And
just clarify the date they referred to?
I am referring to, that's on page 292. The text would have been on 11:30 at 12:38:04. And Ethan is telling his mother, after she says she'll talk to him, they won't judge him, thank you and I love you, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And based on the voicemail that Miss Fine left and the text messages between Ethan and Jennifer, there was not anything more Miss Crumbley was expected to do with regard to that voicemail, correct?
Objection is speculation, Judge, you can't testify that.
Response to the objection?
I'm asking the witness if there was any expectation that Miss Crumbley would do anything.
It's speculation.
I think it's speculation as well. To sustain the objection, rephrase the question, please.
Okay. Based on the conversation between Ethan and his mother, it appears they were going to talk about the voicemail later at home, correct?
Judge, I'm sorry, speculation. Again, this witness cannot testify to what things may be interpreted as. He can only testify to what he extracted from the phone. The evidence speaks for itself.
Rephrase the question.
The conversation between Ethan and Jennifer clearly states that Ethan wants to see the voicemail when he gets home.
Correct,
Now, whatever happened when Ethan got home, you are not aware of, correct?
yes, ma'am, correct.
If there were text messages that had more information, and it was important to this case, you would have certainly brought them in.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm turning now to exhibits 11 and 12, and I just want to make sure that I understand those correctly. 11 and 12 were the Instagram user exports of Jennifer Crumbley and James Crumbley. Do you recall those two exports?
Yes, ma'am.
And those two exports show the username for both Jennifer and James on each exhibit.
Correct,
The information does not show who they follow or what they comment on or what they do on Instagram. Is that correct?
I believe, if I could see it, it states in the report that they are following that particular person.
I believe that that's an exhibit that comes to down the road.
Okay,
This one is just the exhibit, and would you like to see it?
Yes, please.
11 and 12?
yes,
Judge, I'm gonna have the original binder up here for council use for exhibit.
Thank you. Okay, so I will bring you 11 and 12. And if I can take back this one, I'll put this back in the binder. Okay, you would agree with me that on exhibits 11 and 12, it only shows the usernames that Jennifer and James use on Instagram. It does not show any additional information about who they follow, what they like, anything along those lines, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And turning to exhibit 13, the prosecution admitted some photographs that were taken from Ethan Crumbley's Instagram account. Do you recall that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you need to see the photographs in order for me to ask you questions?
Please, yes.
Okay. This is 13,
And those 11 and 12. yeah.
11, and 12. Thank you. I'm just gonna grab my notes over here. Okay, so on that, on those photographs, it appears that Ethan has an Instagram where his username is ethan.crumbly, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of Ethan using any other usernames besides ethan.crumbly with Instagram?
Yes, ma'am.
What are the other usernames that Ethan used?
There was one that was linked to him called Daddy Vader, and
Okay,
another one, Ethan_Crumbly.
and you admitted, prosecution admitted through you, exhibit 14, which shows that Jennifer and James followed the Ethan.Crumbly Instagram account. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the Daddy Vader account and the Ethan_Crumbly account, you did not provide that same exhibit showing that James or Jennifer followed those two accounts, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And in fact, Jennifer and James do not follow those two accounts.
According to that device that we got the data from, correct.
And as far as you know, you cannot tell if Jennifer and James were aware those other Instagram names were used by their son.
Correct.
It's impossible to tell if Jennifer and James had any awareness that those two accounts existed.
Correct.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
With respect to exhibit 13, which are the photographs that were posted, we can agree these were the photographs posted to Ethan's account on the Ethan.Crumbly Instagram user.
That they were posted to his account?
Well, they came from his account.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so the first couple of pictures also show various texts that people put as messages to Ethan through his account, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So for example, on this bullet target practice picture, there were people who wrote messages like, fuck you, rotten hell, and go fuck yourself, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
So when an Instagram user posts a photograph, other people, when they see it, can comment on the photograph, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
It's fair to say that on what you did bring in from Ethan.Crumbly's account, Jennifer and James are not making comments about the photographs, correct?
Correct.
And there is no way to tell if Jennifer and James even saw those photographs.
Correct.
And even beyond that, there is still no way to tell whether they know about two other existing Instagram accounts that Ethan had.
Correct.
Now, there's a photo of a target, photo of a gun, another gun, and then we get into some photos on page 6 of 17, 8 of 17. of this white-faced ghost-looking creature. Are you familiar with these?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, these appear to be photographs that were not initially posted by Ethan, but photographs that he shared, correct?
Shared and posted, he shared to his account, is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Correct.
okay. And on all of those photographs of this ghost kind of looking thing, you would agree with me that Jennifer and James did not post any comments about those photographs either.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And as a matter of fact, when you go through Ethan's Instagram account, there's actually no evidence to show that Jennifer or James have ever been on his Instagram account, other than the fact that they technically follow it, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
I'm gonna just put this back before I mess it up. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I don't want to get these out of order, and I already got them out of order. Put this like this. Okay, and so, for the sake of this hearing, it's fair to say you did not print out, any of the photographs or items that were on that Daddy Vader account or the Ethan_Crumbley account.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And you did already confirm Jennifer and James do not follow those two accounts.
From the device that we have, correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, the photographs that were posted on the Ethan.Crumbley account, you would agree with me, it's not illegal to post photographs of a gun.
Correct.
It's not illegal to post photographs of these ghost-type figures.
Correct.
It's not illegal to post photographs of a bullet with target practice.
Correct.
And you are aware that the Crumbleys shoot guns and go to the gun range, correct?
I've seen a video of Jennifer at a gun range, yes, shooting a gun.
Okay. All right, let's see here. Exhibit 16. Okay, exhibit 15, again, was just Instagram information. And People's Exhibit 16 was Jennifer Crumbley's Instagram photos, is that correct?
I believe so, if I could see, yes, ma'am. Thank you. Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and Jennifer Crumbley posted photos showing a target and that she had gone to the gun range and shot a gun, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
She posted a picture of the gun in the case, correct?
Correct.
And she posted a picture of a Christmas tree, correct?
Correct.
And in the photographs that Jennifer posted, there are no comments between Ethan and her, correct?
Correct.
The next exhibit that was admitted, was number 17, which was a video, that was taken by Ethan Crumbley. Do you recall that video?
Can you refresh my memory? What was the contents of the video?
The video was a video with him holding a gun.
Yes, ma'am. I remember, yes.
Okay. In that video, when you were testifying, you mentioned that you could see a gun lock in that video.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, explain what a gun lock is.
Well, that particular one actually goes through with the slide in the lock, the back position, goes through the barrel, out the front of the barrel, and then locks. So the slide can't go forward and a bullet can't be loaded into the chamber.
Okay, so on that particular gun, there is a way to lock it just within the gun itself, correct?
With the lock?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And in that video, you can't tell who else is around when that video was made.
Correct.
You can't tell if there was other people there, like if Ethan's parents were there, if friends were there, or if Ethan was alone, correct?
Correct.
The video only shows the gun, no faces. Fair to say?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not illegal to take a photograph racking a gun or handling a gun, correct?
Correct.
And I apologize, it's not illegal to take a video racking a gun or playing with a gun, correct?
Correct.
It's also not illegal to take a photograph like that and send it to a friend, correct?
Correct.
Even at Ethan's age, that's something that would not be illegal.
Without looking up the exact law, I couldn't answer that question.
Okay. Now, on exhibit 18, there are Facebook Messenger messages between James Crumbley and Jennifer Crumbley from November 30th. Do you recall that exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you need to see the exhibit, please let me know. In this exhibit, Jennifer is saying, call now in all caps, emergency, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Then you can see that she texts James photographs of that math paperwork before it was altered and then after Ethan had written some more things on it, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The response from James is, my God, WTF. What does WTF mean?
Usually means what the fuck.
So James's response is, my God, what the fuck? Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And the two of them go back and forth talking about him being distraught the night before, talking about how they talked that morning, James and Ethan talked that morning, and a message from James, can you call? Does that all sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
And Jennifer texts that she's heading to his school. And ultimately, she did head to his school. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Jennifer texts, I'm very concerned, headed to school, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And through these text messages, there is absolutely nothing in there to suggest, I think Ethan's going to blow up or is going to shoot a gun at the school, correct?
Correct.
There is nothing in those texts that says, I believe our son has the gun at school and is going to commit a mass shooting.
Correct.
And those texts between Jennifer and James are a very narrow selection of texts compared to all of the texts between them. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you look at texts between Jennifer and James, they amount to this pile that I have sitting here. Does that look about right to you?
Well, for what period of time are we talking
These will be from 6/2 of 21. Oh wait, I'm sorry, these, it's this pile. Which pile was on? Okay, I'm sorry. This is the stack of text between Jennifer and James. These are dated between 9/13/2020, and they go through 11/30 of 2021. You've had the chance to see these text messages, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So out of the text messages belonging to James and Jen, the most important information in that stack was these couple of texts about there being an emergency at the school, and things along those lines. That's why you've testified about that in court, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And if there was any text between Jen and James or a Facebook message that said, I believe our son could be a school shooter, you certainly would have testified about that in this courtroom.
Yes, ma'am.
It's fair for us to conclude that there are no texts where Jennifer or James say, I believe our son is going to shoot up people at the school.
Correct.
There are no texts between the two of them that suggest he would do anything homicidal or anything to hurt other human beings, correct?
Between the two of them?
Yes.
Correct.
So, and throughout the text messages, there are many occasions where Jennifer and James, through the Facebook messages and text, are discussing things with regard to Ethan, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So, for example, there's several texts of, do you know where Ethan is? What time is he getting home from school? How is he riding? Is he getting a ride home, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
There are all kinds of texts about Ethan's doing his schoolwork right now. What is he working on? He's working on this project, all kinds of things like that.
Correct.
So in the grand scheme of all the texts between Jen and James, although they talk often about horses and their own things going on in their lives, we can agree they mention and discuss their son frequently.
Correct.
And by frequently, you would agree with me that at least every day from September 13th, 2020 through 11/30, there are texts where Jennifer and James are talking about their son.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
On Exhibit 19, the prosecution admitted a Celebrate report where it's highlighted that Jennifer and James had a 7-minute and 16-second call at 10:29 a.m. on 11/30. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In addition to that phone call, you're also aware there are other phone calls between Jennifer and James that morning as well, correct?
Can I see the exhibit, ma'am?
Sure,
That morning, you're saying?
yes.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
So in addition to the one you highlighted showing a 7-minute and 16 call, there's also a 32-second call, a 39-second call, a 2-minute and 44-second call. And then up at the top, we can see some calls between the two phones from the day before, correct?
Correct.
So it's fair to say that Jennifer and James were in touch with each other by phone the morning of November 30th.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
May I please approach and grab that back? Thank you. All right, exhibit 20 was the DoorDash map. I don't have any questions about that. Exhibit 21, the people admitted that from Jennifer's device, it appeared she Googled or searched for research clinical depression treatment options. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't know if she was researching clinical depression treatment options for herself, or for her son, or for, you don't know who that was regarding, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
It doesn't say in the search who she was looking for, correct?
Correct.
So, and in addition to that, that's the only search that you provided for this court, although I imagine Jennifer searched for many, many things on her phone at various points in time, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
And if you had seen something in one of Jennifer's searches, like homicidal child, or what do I do if I believe my son is going to shoot students at a school, you would have brought those searches into this court and shown them to us, correct?
Correct.
There were, in fact, no searches along that line. The closest, most relevant search you found was this research clinical depression treatment options.
Correct.
On exhibit 22, you admitted, the prosecution admitted through you, a couple of pages of text messages between Ethan and his mother. Do you recall seeing those?
If I could see them, just to make sure we're talking about.
Sure,
I know what
no
they're-
problem. Okay, so those texts were admitted and they're approximately 4 or 5 pages long, is that about right?
Three pages.
3 pages, okay. And when you look at the total, we print out all of the text between Ethan and Jennifer, and this is going back to June of 2020 up through 11/30 of 21. There's far more text between Jennifer and her son than just those 3 pages, correct?
Correct.
May I approach to grab those?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, on these text messages, Ethan is saying things along the lines of, there's someone in the house, I think, someone walked in the bathroom, I thought it was you, when I came out, no one was home, there's no one in the house though, dude, my door just slammed. Ethan is sending his mother a series of messages claiming there's someone in the house or there's something going on, correct?
Correct.
And in all fairness to Ethan, you don't know if there's somebody in his house, correct?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
You don't know if there really was somebody in his house, correct?
I don't. Correct.
And you don't know also if there are phone calls between Jen and James or between Jen and Ethan at the time that these texts are being sent, correct?
I believe we looked at that, and I don't believe there were any phone calls between them.
The way you would look at the phone calls, though, would be looking from Jennifer's cell phone to Ethan's phone, correct?
And reverse, yes.
In reverse, but if Jennifer was to use the phone at her office, like on her desk, that would not appear in the search in terms of a call between her and Ethan, correct?
On Ethan's phone, it would.
Did you look to see if on Ethan's phone there were calls?
Yes.
And you didn't find any calls?
I don't recall any, no.
The time these messages are sent, the truth is we don't know if there was someone in the house or what was going on, correct?
Correct.
It's impossible for us to take 3 pages of text messages and understand the complete context.
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. That's a decision for this court to make.
I'm sustaining. Go ahead and rephrase, Liz.
It's, whenever we're looking at text messages, the text messages don't say the context within which they were texted, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. I apologize.
I think it's a bad question, and that's my fault.
Okay.
I'm gonna move on.
Okay.
Exhibit 23 continues to be messages between Ethan and his mother. Do you recall admitting those, providing those to the prosecution and them being admitted as Exhibit 23?
I believe I do. If I can just look at it real quick. Thank you. Okay, I remember these. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And these text messages mostly start off with Ethan texting his mother that he believes the house is haunted, that weird things are happening and he's scared the house is haunted. He thinks he got some videos and a picture of a demon, correct?
Correct.
Now, in looking in his phone, you found no videos that would match what Ethan's talking about, correct?
Correct.
You found no photographs of demons, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And Ethan says here, I am not joking, it fucked up the kitchen. In all honesty, you have no way of knowing whether Ethan's joking overall or not, correct?
Correct.
When Jennifer does respond to the messages, she immediately starts asking, where's your dad? Text me when you're done. Are you done yet? Correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
She doesn't really give any answer to all of the, I think our house is haunted kind of texts, correct?
Correct.
And when it comes down to what Ethan was texting, you never saw any evidence that bowls had been thrown and caused any damage, correct?
Correct.
There really is nothing to corroborate these claims Ethan is making about the house being haunted.
Correct.
Exhibit 24, 25, 26, 27 were all photographs of horses, Jennifer with a horse, James with a horse. We can agree they like horses.
Correct.
And these horse photos were taken on one day when Ethan was trying to get a hold of his parents. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And out at the farm, when James and Jennifer are on the horses, I'm sorry, I'll strike that. So the point of these exhibits was just to show there was some moments in time where Ethan could not get a hold of his parents. Is that a fair statement?
Judge, again, I'm the object from the question.
Sustain.
The photographs that you provided are to show where Jennifer and James were when they were not with Ethan, correct?
Correct.
And they were taken at a time when Ethan was trying to get a hold of his mom and dad.
Correct.
Now, in terms of the text messages that exist between Jennifer and Ethan, and this is going back to June 28th of 2020 through 11/30 of 2021, it's fair to say that there are, this is my printed version, but there are many, many more texts than just these couple of pages that you admitted, correct?
Correct.
And the pages that you admitted would be the most important evidence out of all of the texts for this court to see, correct?
Correct.
And if there were texts in here between Jen and Ethan, where Ethan is saying, I'm going to blow up a school, I am going to hurt people, I feel homicidal, anything along those lines, you would have brought those texts into court and shown them to this audience, correct?
Correct.
And those type of texts do not exist in what you've seen between Jennifer Crumbley and Ethan.
Correct.
All right, turning to Exhibit 28, there was a conversation between James and Jennifer Crumbley that was admitted as People's Exhibit 28. Do you need to see those
Please, yes, ma'am.
exchanges?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
These texts are Jennifer and James talking about something that happened the night before with Ethan. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, ma'am.
And they are talking about how is he doing and what he needs to do to get his stuff back, correct?
Correct.
In these text messages, the parents confirm he's just doing school. Is he okay to work? Things along those lines, correct?
Correct.
And in the end, the parents are just discussing what was possibly an argument the night before.
Something that, I don't know if I can answer that question.
Just again, I have to object to the form of the question, and again, this witness can't interpret the text messages that he has extracted, he can only verify that they came from the devices.
I agree, and I'll ask the question a different way. This conversation between Jennifer and James does not say anything about thinking that their son is a danger to other people, correct?
Correct.
It does not say anything about thinking Ethan would hurt anyone.
Correct.
And again, when you look at all of the texts and messages between James and Jen, there is nothing like that in those messages.
Correct.
And if there was something like that in those messages, you would have brought it to the court's attention.
Correct.
The items that you provided and that were admitted through the prosecution is what you believe to be the most important evidence out of everything you've reviewed.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Exhibit 29 were messages admitted between Ethan and a friend of his regarding voices and going to a doctor. Do you recall those messages?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you want to see those or?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I'm handing you Exhibit 29.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes,
And within these messages, Ethan is saying that he's going to ask his parents to go to the doctor tomorrow or Tuesday again, correct?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Ethan states, this time I am going to tell them about the voices.
Correct.
When Ethan says them, we have no way of knowing, it's not identified, if it was his parents or the doctor. that
Correct.
he would tell about voices, correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And when Ethan writes, I only told them about the people I saw, again, we don't know who them is.
Correct.
At the end, when Ethan says, like, I am mentally and physically dying, we don't know if Ethan really feels like he's mentally and physically dying, or if he's just exaggerating, correct?
His words were that, but yeah, correct. I don't know what his mindset was.
You don't know what his mindset was or the context of what was going on at the time he typed that, correct?
Correct.
And again, if you had seen messages saying things like, I am going to shoot up the school, I am going to kill people, making plans for this, those are text messages that you would have brought in for this court, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And this is the best evidence that you found that you think is relevant. This conversation about going to the doctors and telling them about various things.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And we don't even know who them is.
Correct.
Exhibits 30 and 31 were videos that Ethan took on 8/19 and 8/20. Do you recall those two videos?
That were in the text thread, those two?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's fair to say that in those two videos, again, you cannot see any people in those, you can't see the faces of any people in those videos.
Correct.
You can't see who was around at the time the videos are made.
Correct.
There is no description about why those videos were made.
Correct.
All we know is that those two videos were made and that Ethan texted those two videos to his friend Brady.
Correct, with some conversation, correct.
With some conversation, okay, but in the grand scheme of things, the taking the videos he took was not illegal.
Well, him possessing the gun at that time, unless I know the exact, I don't know, I don't want to answer what him having that gun being illegal and what was going on in the video.
Okay, fair enough.
Your main counsel, I wrote.
Okay, so we talked about those videos that he sent to a friend, and your testimony was that there was some conversation between him and the friend. And that conversation was admitted as Exhibit 32. Would you like to see Exhibit 32? So I can
Yes,
ask
ma'am,
you
please.
some questions? Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Just for the record, I have 6 pages for exhibit 32, is that what you did as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so on the first page, we can see that a video was sent to Ethan's friend.
Correct.
And there's discussion about inviting his friend to the gun range.
Correct.
And we can see that Ethan sends another video to his friend.
Correct.
And the friend is saying things like, nice, now pull the trigger, JK, JK, JK. What is your understanding of what JK, JK, JK means?
Just kidding.
So just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. And those are all things the friend says to Ethan. Nice, now pull the trigger, JK, 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 correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And Ethan responds about how his dad left the gun out, but he knows gun safety, so it's no problem, correct?
Correct.
And then he says, now it's time to shoot up the school, and in capital letters, JK, 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 correct?
Correct.
So this conversation existed between Ethan and his friend,
Correct.
but there is not any kind of conversation like this between Ethan and his mother
Correct.
or Ethan and his father.
Correct.
Now, the last time we were in court, the prosecution ended by asking you about some of the conversations that Ethan and Brady would have. And your testimony was that they talked about disturbing things, including the bird head, hurting another girl at school, and mentioned some of the other topics between Ethan and Brady. Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
And Ethan and Brady's text messages, if I told you that it's this entire pile is the communications between Ethan and Brady, would that surprise you?
I believe they're about 25,000, so it looks about right.
25,000 messages, about 5,000 pieces of paper when you print it out.
Looks about right.
And you would agree with me that while there was conversations about the bird head and hurting another student, Ethan and Brady talked about way, way, way more topics than just those types of things, correct?
Correct.
They talk about playing different video games, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
They talk about how much they eat versus how big their stool is when they go to the bathroom.
I don't recall that exact one right now, but
They talk about silly boy things.
yes, ma'am.
They talk about other students.
Yes, ma'am.
They talk about homework.
Correct.
What you've pulled out to share with this court, it's fair to say it's a very small section compared to the grand scheme of what Ethan and his friend talk about.
Correct.
Okay. And again, you pulled out what you believe is the most important information for this courtroom.
Yes, ma'am.
And these are between Ethan and Brady. You don't have any, it doesn't appear that Jennifer or James are grouped into any of these messages, correct?
Correct.
It appears these messages are strictly between those two boys. Is that true?
Yes, ma'am.
It's also fair to say that a topic Ethan talks about with Brady is hiding things from his parents, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
He talks about hiding the bird head and what he's doing with birds from his parents.
Yes, ma'am.
He talks about efforts he's making to wait until his parents leave the house so he can do things and not get caught, correct?
Correct.
There certainly is nothing in those texts that show my mom and dad know I'm cutting off the head of a bird and support me doing this, correct?
Correct.
And if there was anything like that with respect to Jennifer or James, you would have brought those messages into court, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the grand scheme of all the messages between Ethan and Brady, there is nothing to indicate that Jennifer or James were told or were aware of a plan to commit a school shooting like what happened at Oxford High School on 11/30.
Correct.
In fact, Ethan discusses repeatedly hiding things from his parents
Yes, ma'am.
and doing it when they're not home.
Correct.
Your Honor, may I have just one moment to check in with my client? I have nothing further for this witness, thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mario. That's the exhibit of what's admitted. Do you want these of James and Jennifer?
No,
Okay, do you think we can break it?
no, I think they're good. We can move them up. Good afternoon, or good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
I just have a few questions for you. So obviously you reviewed a massive number of text messages
Yes, ma'am.
and Facebook messages.
Yes, ma'am.
And you also reviewed text messages between James and his son.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And it's fair to say that there weren't a lot of messages between James and his son.
Correct.
But in reviewing messages between James and Jennifer, you note that James was with Ethan quite a bit. Would that be fair?
Yes.
In fact, there were often times where James was answering questions that Jennifer had and he was with Ethan, right?
Correct.
And in the messages between James and Jen, or between Ethan and James, you don't see anything where Ethan was asking James for help. Is that fair? Let me clarify. You don't see any messages from Ethan to James where he was saying he needed help mentally, correct?
Not that I recall. Correct.
Or that he needed help because he was going to do something bad. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And you don't see any messages from James to Jennifer or from Jennifer to James saying that Ethan had given them that information. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And staying with the messages, the 5,000 or 6,000 pages between Brady and Ethan, between the minor and Ethan, there's nothing that you recall seeing where Ethan indicated that he'd said anything to his parents. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
If that had happened, if you had seen those messages, you would have advised the prosecution.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, stepping away from the messages, I think we've covered them sufficiently. Also, while you were in court last time, there was a recording played. I believe it was, let's see what Exhibit 5, which was a recording of James Crumbley calling 911.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall that?
Yes, ma'am.
And in the recording, James called 911. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Nobody called him.
Correct.
Okay. James voluntarily called 911
Yes.
and reported that his handgun was missing
Correct.
and his ammunition,
Correct.
and that his son was a student at Oxford High School
Correct.
and he had some concerns.
Correct.
You also saw, and I said I was going to get us to stay away from the text messages, but you also saw that James texted Ethan that morning. Is that fair?
Yes. Correct.
He texted him after getting a call about the math homework or the math test and the drawings.
Correct.
And he texted him when James suspected that something was happening at the school. Do you recall that text message?
Yes.
He checked in on him. Is that
Correct.
fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And that text message wasn't, Ethan, are you the shooter? Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
In fact, he just asked if something was happening at the school.
Correct.
He called Ethan. Do you
Yes.
recall that? And then he texted Ethan again.
Correct.
And he asked Ethan to call him.
Correct.
And then he called Ethan more.
Correct.
And then he called 911.
Correct.
And you created a timeline. I believe it was your timeline that was created of phone calls and messages and various things from November 30th of 2021. Part of that timeline is one of the exhibits.
Can you tell me which one you're referring to?
Yes, exhibit 19, a call log.
From the timeline of the phone, but yes.
Okay. But you reviewed various phone calls, incoming, outgoing, text messages, incoming, outgoing to James Crumbley's phone. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall also seeing phone calls and text messages with Sergeant Bryan from the sheriff's office?
It wasn't labeled. There's an 858 number I recall seeing, which is phone numbers from the 38 East Sheriff's Office. I don't know what Sergeant Joe Bryan's phone number is, and it wasn't labeled his name.
But you recall seeing phone calls from an 858 phone number?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you recall there being multiple phone calls with the 858 number? Or do you not? If you don't recall.
I don't recall.
Okay. From what you remember in reviewing the phone calls, you didn't see anything that would indicate that James wasn't responding to any phone calls. Is that fair?
Correct.
Now, when you were testifying at our last hearing, you made specific mention that James Crumbley was the owner of the cell phones on the account. Is that correct?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Now, it's fair to say that parents get cell phones for their kids all the time. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
And they may say it's Johnny's cell phone, correct?
Name it Johnny's cell phone? What do you mean? Or
No, a parent may say it's Johnny's cell phone. Give Johnny a cell phone, it's Johnny's cell phone.
yes, ma'am.
But it's actually the parent's phone, correct?
Correct.
Or they may do it for their spouse or significant other. Is that
Yes,
fair?
ma'am.
Now, it isn't expected that simply because somebody is listed as an owner of the phone, that they know everything that that the user is doing on the phone. Is that fair?
Actually, speculation, Judge.
I'm going to sustain, rephrase the question, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let me ask it. You're not aware of any time where the listed owner of the phone has been responsible for what the user has done. Is that fair?
Objection, Judge. In proper form. It's not relevant.
Your Honor, as for relevance, I would argue that it is relevant.
I don't know what really is relevant. Go ahead, you can answer the question.
Can I have the question again, please?
Sure. You're not aware of any times that the listed owner of a cell phone has been held responsible for what the user of the phone has done with the phone.
Judge, objection, I'm sorry, it's an improper form question. It's a compound question. It calls for a legal conclusion, and it's overly broad.
Your Honor,
She's asking him what he knows at this point in time. I'm overruling the objection. Go ahead and answer the question.
Now, just for clarification, are you referring to James and Ethan's phones? Like, is he responsible to look at his phone, or I'm sorry, I don't understand the question completely.
fine.
I wanna,
let's take it step by step.
okay.
Somebody goes to a cell phone store and purchases cell phones.
Yes, correct.
Correct. And they purchase the cell phones in their own name, correct?
Yep.
And then they can distribute the cell phones to whom they choose. Is that fair?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And they can give those cell phones to their children
Correct.
or their significant other
Correct.
or a stranger on the street.
Sure.
Sure. My question is, you're not aware of a time that the person who purchased those phones in their name would be responsible for what the other people that they gave the phones to did on those phones.
I would have to say depend on who the people are they gave the phone to. If it's a juvenile, I would say yes.
You're not aware of a time where the owner has been held responsible for what the juvenile did on the phone. Is that fair?
Fair, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify something regarding a few. So I'm going back to the text messages again. I apologize.
It's okay.
There were text messages in Exhibit 22, which I believe are the text messages between the other minor and Ethan,
Okay, yes, ma'am.
or between Ethan and his mother. I don't recall if you looked at the dates, but those were March of 2021.
Sounds familiar. Yes, ma'am.
And you don't recall seeing anything after March of 2021 in any of the thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of text messages that you looked at. Is that fair?
March of 2021, and whose text threads?
So the first text thread, that was a really bad question. Thank you.
Okay.
So the first text thread I'm asking about is between Ethan and his mom. And
Okay,
it was talking about the noises and the sounds in the house and.
yes, ma'am.
And my partner discussed that with you a little bit, but that was March of 2021. And you don't recall any messages after that section that we looked at. You don't recall any messages after that about the voices or anything like that?
Referring to that conversation?
Correct.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
And you don't recall anything in any other text threads about the voices or the noises or anything like that?
Correct.
And just one point of clarification, Exhibit 32, which is it's the text thread between the other minor and Ethan. And I believe that was the text thread that had the videos.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, the firearm in those videos was not the firearm that was used on November 30th. Is that correct?
Correct.
One moment, Your Honor. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Anybody go ahead?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Do you want to?
Detective, it's fair to say, isn't it, that the evidence that we've admitted in this preliminary examination, not a trial, but preliminary examination, is a snapshot of the digital evidence you reviewed on these phones?
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And this evidence speaks for itself. If it's on the phone, it's on the phone. If it's not on the phone, then it's not there, right?
Correct.
Okay. You also testified on February 8th that some information, at least from Jennifer Crumbley's Facebook account, was deleted.
Your Honor, I don't object to believing the nature of these questions. This is redirect, not cross.
I can rephrase. Do you recall testifying on February the 8th of this year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you recall being asked about a screenshot from Kira Pennick to Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you also testified then that particular Facebook message wasn't on Jennifer Crumbley's device.
Correct.
And do you recall why?
The Messenger app was deleted.
Okay. So what does that mean? Tell me about that.
When it's deleted,
Yeah.
the user tells the phone to wipe it from the phone. I no longer want to use it, and it wipes the databases off the phone to preserve storage on the device overall.
So according to your review, Jennifer Crumbley deleted the Facebook Messenger app off of her phone.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you were asked about the Instagram account of Ethan.Crumbley.
Correct.
And you were able to verify that both Jennifer Crumbley and James Crumbley followed that Instagram account.
Correct.
Okay. On February the 8th, you were asked about who posted and who didn't post, if you can verify that on the Ethan.Crumbley account. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Did you do some research in that regard?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that, please.
So the pictures that were there all had an uploaded IP address, and I did it again just last night. There were a total of 8 of them, IP addresses. And you can go, there's a website that tells you who actually owns that IP address, not the particular person, not Ed Wogrowski, but Comcast or Verizon or T-Mobile, and 7 of the 8 IP addresses were owned by T-Mobile, which is the phone carrier that the Crumbleys had. And then the 8th one was owned by Charter Communications, which was the internet service provider.
So does that give you a little bit of a degree of certainty as to where those photographs came from?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and tell me why.
Because again, that's the T-Mobile, the IPs that are owned by T-Mobile is a phone carrier that they use, that all 3 of them used. And Charter Communications is the internet service provider in that area.
Okay. You were just asked about Exhibit 18, which is the portion of the Facebook Messenger thread between Jennifer and James Crumbley from November the 30th of 2021.
Correct?
Okay.
Yep.
Now, there are no other Facebook messages between the two of them on November the 30th of 21. Is that right?
Correct.
So you didn't take some out and leave some in. Is that right?
No, sir.
Okay. And those are all the messages from that particular date between those two.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You were also asked about phone calls between Ethan Crumbley or potential phone calls between Ethan Crumbley and these 2 defendants on March the 9th, 17th, and 20th.
Correct.
So I'm going to refer you to those exhibits. Exhibits 22 and 23, that's the text message thread between Ethan Crumbley and Jennifer Crumbley, where he talks about he's seeing demons in bowls flying to shelves. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you went through all devices on those particular dates. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And those photographs that we admitted, the photographs of James Crumbley on a horse, Jennifer Crumbley on a horse, those were taken the same date and time that Ethan Crumbley was texting his mother about seeing those things. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, were there any phone calls between Ethan and Jennifer Crumbley during that time period?
No, sir.
Were there any phone calls between Ethan and James Crumbley in that time period?
No, sir.
Were there any messages from James and Ethan Crumbley?
No, sir.
And we've already verified on the 8th of this year that there were no other messages between Jennifer and Ethan Crumbley in that time period. Right?
Correct.
All right. You were asked about the entire Facebook Messenger thread between James and Jennifer Crumbley. There are thousands of messages. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, were there, in your review, and again, this is a preliminary examination, not a trial, but in your review, in those messages, did you see any reference about getting Ethan Crumbley help?
No, sir.
You see any reference about sending Ethan Crumbley to a therapist?
No, sir.
Did you see any discussion about getting him to a doctor at all?
No, sir.
You were also asked about the text message thread between Ethan Crumbley and that other juvenile. And that's the over 20,000 messages. This is the stack the council displayed to us here today, right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you were asked about a few things, but I want to go through a few more. Now, it's true, isn't it, that in June of 21, Ethan Crumbley is sending messages to that friend about how he bought a Derringer.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And what is a Derringer?
It's a small handgun.
Okay. And he sent messages to that other individual. Again, we talked about the video that he sent holding the 22 Kel-Tec. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you've already testified that James Crumbley did own 22 Kel-Tec.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that had context to that video, that photograph, and said, "Look what my dad left out." You've already testified to that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in June of 21, Ethan writes, "The thing is, I had over $1,000 before the Derringer, but now I only have like 900 or 800. You recall that text message?
Yes, sir.
And there's a lot of discussion between Ethan and other juvenile about wanting guns and buying guns. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And there's also a fair amount of discussion, in fact, quite a bit of discussion between those two individuals about his mental state. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir.
So you were asked about, I think counsel said, is it fair to say that Ethan Crumbley talked about hiding things from his parents? You recall the answer to that question?
Yes, sir.
And specifically their text that Ethan Crumbley sends that other juvenile that he is, quote unquote, fucked up.
Correct.
Okay. And he talks about his dark side.
Yes.
Is that one or two text messages, or are there many text messages like that?
I believe there were many.
And does he also talk to that other juvenile about trying to bring things up to his parents?
Yes.
April the 5th, isn't it true that Ethan Crumbley writes, "Now my mom thinks I take drugs," and right after that, like she thinks the reason why I'm so mad and sad all the time because I take drugs and she doesn't worry about my mental health. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
And then he writes, they make me feel like I'm the problem.
Correct.
And that's the same text conversation, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And he also writes, my mom makes everyone feel like a piece of shit.
Yes, sir.
And Ethan many times says that he is hallucinating. Is that right?
Correct.
And in fact, he says, like I hear people talking to me and see someone in the distance.
Correct.
He says, I actually asked my dad to take to the doctor yesterday, but he just gave me some pills and told me to quote unquote suck it up.
Yes, sir.
Then he wrote, like it's at the point that I'm asking to go to the doctor. You remember seeing that?
Yes, sir.
And then seeing, my mom laughed when I told her.
Yes, sir.
And in that same conversation, Ethan's describing a, quote, in his words, quote unquote, breakdown to his friend. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And he writes, that's what happened when I broke down. I started sobbing in the shower and then laughing my ass off. Mental breakdown is what it's called. Said I should see a doctor if I have one. Google said they can last weeks and it can cause hallucinations. So fuck me. He wrote that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's the same text conversation where he's telling his friend that he asked his parents to see a doctor.
Correct.
And you've already testified there has been no communications between James and Jennifer Crumbley about taking Ethan Crumbley to see a doctor or therapist, right?
Correct.
And Ethan writes in all caps, I hear fucking people. He writes, because my life is fucked. And for context, this is taking place in April of 2021, the same time that we emitted a portion of that text message conversation in exhibits 29 and 32. Does that sound right?
I recall it. Yes, sir.
Okay. And Ethan also writes, I also tracked the amount of sleep I've gotten the past 5 days. I've only gotten 17 hours of sleep. And that's a text from Ethan to that other individual.
Yes, sir.
Now, in these text messages, they also talk about playing video games.
Yes.
Okay. And are you able to get a general idea of how often and what hours of the day or night that Ethan and his friend are playing video games?
Through the text messages and the timeline on the phone. Yes, sir.
Okay. And tell us about that.
Well, from the conversation going back and forth, or do you want to get on, play Fortnite, get on the, and play games, or the phone usage when there's downtime? If there's a downtime between 5 in the morning and 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, you could assume that they're not using the phone.
We would object to the relevance of the amount of time spent playing video games.
It all goes to the failure to use ordinary care, Judge. These defendants are both charged with being grossly negligent.
Overruling the objection, go ahead.
Thank you. Now, did it appear that he was playing a little bit of video games or a lot of video games?
A lot of video games.
Okay. And that just didn't happen, right after school let out and before a normal bedtime, right?
Correct.
Okay, so what kind of hours was he on his devices?
All hours of the night, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning.
So this text about I've only gotten 17 hours of sleep in 5 days, that has some weight to it to you, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
And Ethan continues about his mental breakdowns, in his words, mental breakdowns, to his friend, the other juvenile, and says, I need help. I was thinking calling 911 so I could go to the hospital, but then my parents would be really pissed. He wrote those?
I recall that. Yes, sir.
And then his friend asked him, when did all this bad shit start happening?
I would object to the leading nature of these questions. This is redirect.
Judge, counsel opened the door by asking general questions, extremely general questions to this witness about a 25,000 text message string. Now, as I pointed out, this is a preliminary examination and not a trial. So we weren't intending to go through all 25,000 text messages, but counsel opened that door, and now she left the impression that we only selectively admitted certain messages and there's nothing else out there. And I have to correct that impression. Thank you. So his friend asked him, when did all this bad shit start happening? Excuse my language, Judge, this is just a quote. And then he wrote 2 weeks ago, is that right?
I recall that. Yes, sir.
Okay, and if we're given a context, 2 weeks prior to this text would be,
Your Honor, I object to the leading nature of these questions. I don't object. I am not making a relevancy objection. I'm making an objection to the leading nature of these questions.
Judge, I'm going to ask for leeway in this particular witness with this regard to this particular piece of evidence, and that's because the nature of the evidence. Counsel made a show of this amount of evidence in the phone. She printed it out for that show specifically. And in order to effectively direct this witness to certain pieces of that evidence to rebut the impression that she so purposely laid, I have to lead the witness. I need some leeway.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of leeway, but then we need to move on.
That's fair, Judge. I appreciate that.
As you said, this is a probable cause hearing. The court is perfectly aware of what the burden of proof is and what needs to be presented in order to establish that burden of proof.
Thank you, Judge. I'll just go through a few more with you, okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, we had already admitted, we talked about, I believe this was exhibit 29. You were showing exhibit 29. And that is that text message thread from April the 5th to his friend, okay? And that text specifically, which we were admitted, is I'm going to ask my parents to go to the doctor's tomorrow or Tuesday again, but this time I'm going to tell them about the voices. And we've already discussed that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In these text messages in this vein, they're not, like I said, they're not just one or two text messages about this particular topic, but there are multiple, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you've already discussed some of the other more disturbing things you found on Ethan Crumbley's phone. And I think you talked about on the last hearing about a conversation about raping and torturing and killing another classmate.
Correct. Yes, sir.
And you were asked about the bird head specifically by defense counsel on cross. Now, there is a conversation in this text thread about that bird head, am I right?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, he says that he's surprised his mom didn't find the bird head because it was in his room.
Correct.
Now, these texts about his quote-unquote mental breakdown continue not just on March or April 21, but throughout the text thread when it ends abruptly at the end of October of 21.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So approximately 7 months, there are text messages regarding the mental breakdown.
Correct.
In fact, regarding the bird head specifically, on October the 11th of 21, there's a text message thread between Ethan Crumbley and that friend where he says, "Holy shit, my mom legit almost found the bird head. She pulled away the sheet covering it and was fully exposed, but IDK," meaning that I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know how the fuck she didn't see it. My dad was even in there. Jesus Christ, my heart is pounding right now. And that's in October the 11th of 21. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I recall that.
Now, you're aware that a bird head was recovered from the Oxford High School, one of the bathrooms of the Oxford High School, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was recovered on November 11th of 20.
Correct.
So that was 1 full month after Ethan Crumbley's writing about his parents almost found it in his room.
Correct.
So you were also asked about the 293-page text thread between Ethan Crumbley and Jennifer Crumbley.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And during the exam on February the 8th, we admitted certain portions of that text thread.
Correct.
And just so everybody's clear, the portions that were omitted did not remove certain text messages. That's a true and accurate depiction of that text message conversation from the dates that we omitted. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, sir.
A counsel asked you, made a point about a text from Jennifer Crumbley to Ethan Crumbley where it said, "I love you." Do you recall being asked that question?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you go through a Celebrate reader report and you export it to a PDF file, are you able to search for certain words?
Yes, sir.
Do you have the opportunity to search for the word love?
Yes, sir.
How many times does the word love pop up?
Objection.
This is so irrelevant.
Sustained.
Because they brought it up. Now, was there any discussion in the text message thread, the 293-page text message thread between Ethan Crumbley and Jennifer Crumbley about getting Ethan Crumbley help?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay, so we already talked about the Facebook Messenger thread between these two defendants, but specifically between Ethan and Jennifer Crumbley, anything in there?
No, sir.
Or what about anything in the text message thread between Ethan Crumbley and James Crumbley?
No, sir.
Any talk in any of those text message conversations about getting him to a doctor?
No, sir.
We have one moment, Your Honor. Nothing for, thank you.
Okay, you can step down.
Hold on.
You can step down, no worries. Great, we're gonna take a quick break and then we're gonna come back with the next witness, so we'll return in about, 10 minutes.
Thank you, Judge.
Please rise.
Please be seated. Prosecutor, you want to call your next witness, please?
This Cammy back. She's in the hallway.
Okay, please raise your right hand for me. Do you solemnly swear your testimony you're going to give will be the truth under the penalty of perjury?
Yes.
Please have a seat. Please state and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter.
Cammy, Cammy,
You're going to keep your voice up.
Sorry. Cammy, Cammy, back, B-A-C-K,
D-A-C-K.
B.
B-A-C-K. Okay, Ms. Back, just a couple of housekeeping rules here. As you noticed, we do have multiple microphones located throughout the courtroom. We are required by law to record all court proceedings, so it's necessary that you keep your voice up and that you verbalize all responses as opposed to saying or shaking your head. If at any time you don't understand any questions, please let the attorneys know, and so that there's no misunderstanding as to what the question is. You are comfortable, you can keep your mask off. We do have the partitions here throughout the courtroom. It's up to you.
Okay,
If
thank
you're
you.
with your desk on, I do need you to speak up loudly.
Okay, thank you.
May I, Judge? Thank you. Now, Ms. Back, I want you to pretend like I'm at the very back of the courtroom here, so you can keep your voice really loud for us, okay?
Okay,
Now, is it fair to say that you work at a business that sells firearms and ammunition?
yes.
Okay. And how long have you worked there?
A year and 3 months.
And what's your job title or responsibilities there?
Office manager?
Now, do you also occasionally conduct the sales of firearms and ammunition yourself?
Yes.
And how many firearm sales have you been a part of in your time there?
Can't say
Is it more than 10?
yes,
Okay. Is it more than 20?
yes,
Okay. So this is it's just a regular course of business. Would that be right?
yes,
Okay. Now, is there a process when somebody buys a handgun?
yes.
Tell me what that process is.
We have to take their driver's license, make copies. We have to give the customer the 4473 form. They fill it out and I do the next check on them.
Okay, let me stop real quick. What's the 4473?
It's the information of the customer,
Okay.
just their address, date of birth, the questions on the form they have to answer.
Okay. And you said a NICS form?
The next check
NICS check? What's
on,
that?
on the computer, we run it through the ATF or
Okay.
FBI.
And then,
So you're going to have to assume that we don't know as much as you do.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
So when you're saying you're doing a mixed check, what specifically are you doing?
Running the form electronically.
Is that-
Form the 4473?
Yes, ma'am.
is that like a background check?
Yes,
Okay. And then is there a trigger lock statement given as well?
yes.
And what's that?
The trigger lock statement,
Right.
it's stating, it's stating that the gun that is purchased is cut, we're giving the lock to them.
Okay. Now, when your store sells a firearm, specifically a handgun, do you also give a ATF Youth Handgun Safety Act notice?
Yes,
Is that in the form of a pamphlet?
yes.
May I approach the witness, Judge? This is People's Proposed 79. Ms. Back, what have I just handed you?
The youth handgun safety guide.
Okay, and is that what is given to every purchaser of a handgun?
Yes.
Okay. People move to admit 79.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
Now, I'm going to direct your attention to the screen over here to your right. And this is a photograph, it actually is from your store, and it's the same color, same size, same material given on every single time. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and this is 33 for the record. I believe we have a stipulation.
It's 33.
The photograph is 33, yes.
Is that correct? You stipulated to that?
Correct, Your Honor.
Now, does the store that you work at have notices posted throughout the store?
Yes.
What sort of notices?
The youth handgun safety and the, don't lie to buy.
Okay,
I
I'm
believe
gonna,
it.
again, direct your attention to the screen here, and Judge, we have a stipulation, this is 34, and this is a photograph. Is this photograph of the notice posted at your store?
Yes,
And this is the don't lie for the other guy?
yes.
And where is this posted?
Behind the register.
Okay, so if a purchaser were to purchase a firearm, it'd be in their line of sight?
Yes,
And you said the youth safety notice, not just is given, but it's also posted?
yes.
And this is exhibits 35, and we do have a stipulation in exhibit 35, Your Honor.
Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
And that's also posted where?
Behind our register.
Okay. When a firearm is purchased, you keep a sales receipt.
Yes,
This is exhibit 36, and I believe we also have a stipulation in 36.
Correct, Your Honor.
And do you recognize this?
yes, I do.
Okay, and how do you recognize this?
My handwriting.
And this is a sales receipt from the date of November the 26th, 2021 to James Robert Crumbley, his address, and his information he provided, and what was sold to James Robert Crumbley on that day.
A pistol, 6-hour pistol.
Okay, and that SP2022, what's that?
That is the model of,
The model number?
yes,
Okay, and this is a 9mm handgun, am I right?
yes.
Okay. And when you sell a pistol, specifically this particular pistol, do you just hand over the handgun itself, or does it come in some kind of case?
It comes in a case.
Okay, describe the case for me.
It would be a black case, or a gray color case.
Okay,
With the pistol and the extra clips, if the gun has extra clips, the lock,
when you say clips, you mean magazine?
yes.
Okay, so there's the pistol itself, and you said the lock. What kind of lock?
Cable lock.
Cable lock. What is that?
It is a lock that locks the pistol, goes through the trigger.
Okay, and is it your store's policy to turn over a trigger lock or a cable lock with every single handgun purchase?
Yes,
And was one given to James Robert Crumbley
Yes.
on November the 26th?
yes,
Okay. And we've said his name. Do you recall making the actual transaction?
I do.
Do you see that person who identified himself as James Robert Crumbley to you on November the 26th of last year?
Yes.
Can you please point to him, describe something he's wearing today?
Gentleman in the orange jumpsuit.
Your Honor, will the record reflect identification of defendant James Crumbley?
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So noted.
Okay. Had you seen him in the store before on November 26th?
Prior to November the 20th?
Correct. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. On November the 26th, tell me how the purchase happened.
We were kind of busy. I stepped out of my office to help my counter guy. There was a gentleman, between the gentleman my counter guy was helping and James Crumbley. I approached the older gentleman first and he said, go ahead and help James Crumbley. Went over, asked him what I could help him with. And he pointed to the 6-hour pistol. And I said, oh, would you like to see it? And he said, no, I would like to purchase it. I've had my eye on it for a few days. And I said, oh, and which I recognize Mr. Crumbley because he's made multiple purchases from us before. And I said to him, you know the routine. And he said, yeah. And I got his license, made copies, gave him the form, filled it out, ran the background check on him. His research did not come straight through, so it was taking quite a bit of time. So the store kind of cleared out, and I told Mr. Crumbley, I said, you're in research. And he said, that's fine, that's normal. I can just go home, and you guys can give me a call. And so I left my counter guy the information, and I proceeded back to my office.
Okay. And did he go home or did he stay?
He stayed.
Okay. Was he alone or was he with somebody else?
He was with someone,
And was that person an adult or was that person not an adult?
not an adult.
Okay. Had you ever seen that person before?
I had not.
All right. And did you at that point in time know who that person was?
I did not.
All right. Could you describe him, please?
He was approximately 5'7", 5'8". He had dark hair.
Short hair or long hair?
It was kind of long,
Okay.
shaggy.
Now, James Crumbley, he didn't shop around at all. He just picked out that 9mm.
He picked out just the 9mm. Yes,
Did he pay with credit card, debit card, or cash?
I believe it was credit card.
And what happened? What happened next?
He paid. My counter guy gave him the item, and they left the store.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 37. Now, you referenced the 4473. Is that also known as the firearms transaction record?
Yes,
Okay. And it has the defendant's, well, it's hard to see on that picture here. It has James Robert Crumbley's information on there.
mhm,
And it also has notification on here. One of the boxes that he fills out is that he is acknowledging that it is illegal to buy a gun for somebody else.
yes.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. And he acknowledged that as well.
yes,
All right. And that's the effect of the notices posted throughout the store. Am I right?
yes.
This is Exhibit 37. We have a stipulation to that, Judge. Move to admit.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
Now, you have testified that a trigger lock statement is given as well.
Yes,
Okay, this is Exhibit 38. We also have a stipulation to this. Is this the trigger lock statement that is provided to a purchaser of a handgun?
yes.
And what does this state?
It just states that the gun comes with that we provided the trigger lock
Okay.
or the case lock for the firearm.
And you have already testified that it is your store policy to provide one of those to every purchaser.
Yes,
Okay. And when you provide it, is it encased in anything?
the lock,
Yes.
it's in the gun case.
Okay. But is it itself in a plastic baggie?
Yes,
Okay. And you testified earlier about that gun case. I want to go back to that very briefly. You said it's a plastic case.
Are you moving to object this?
I'm sorry. Yes, this is 38.
No objection, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
Now, the case that the firearm is contained in when it's sold, it's plastic?
yes,
Okay. And is there a clasp on it to close it?
yes.
Okay. Is there a locking mechanism on that?
No,
Okay, so there's no combination lock or a key lock.
no,
And that's what was sold to James Crumbley on November the 26th, 2021.
yes.
Thank you. Okay, one moment, Your Honor. I've nothing further.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
I have all counsel, please.
Yes, Your Honor.
Is making quote unquote multiple purchases.
Yes,
And it's fair to say that he had 2 prior firearms purchases. Is that fair?
yes.
Okay. And they were approximately over a period of 5 months.
Unsure.
Okay. It wasn't the day before, right?
No,
The week before?
no,
Okay. So it was over some time.
yes,
And he told you that he'd been in the store previously and looked at other handguns. Is that fair?
yes,
And he said that he knew which gun he wanted because of his prior visits. Do you recall that conversation?
No,
You do recall, however, that he was very clear that he wanted the one handgun based on his prior visits to the store.
yes,
And he purchased the handgun that he asked for. Is that fair?
yes,
And you spoke with law enforcement after Mr. Crumbley purchased the gun. After November 30th of 2021.
law enforcement as of,
The ATF, the
Yes.
police, somebody. Okay.
yes,
And you recall telling them that you didn't have any reason to believe that Mr. Crumbley was purchasing that firearm for anybody else. Is that fair?
yes,
There were no statements made that he was purchasing for somebody else, right?
no,
The individual he was standing with didn't say, that's the one I want, right?
no,
He didn't say, this is the one you want, right?
correct,
In fact, had those things occurred, you couldn't have sold the firearm. Is that fair?
yes,
Now, the prosecutor showed you Exhibit 33 and 79. He showed you the actual pamphlet, which is Exhibit 79, and then Exhibit 33 is a printout. It's a copy of the Youth ATF Handgun Notice, Youth Handgun Safety Act Notice.
yes,
And you're familiar with this, correct?
yes,
And you're familiar with firearms laws?
yes,
You kind of have to be for what you do, right?
kind of, yes,
So you know that in this notice, it says that it's unlawful for a minor to possess a handgun overall. Is that fair?
correct,
But there are exceptions, correct?
no,
May I approach, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
third page,
Yes. You want to look at page 3 of Exhibit 33. There's the heading 18 USC 922 parenthesis X and parenthesis. Do you see that? It's like right in the middle.
oh, yes,
Okay.
yes,
And if you look at X1, it says it's unlawful for a person to sell, deliver, or otherwise transfer to a person who the transferor knows or has reasonable cause to believe is a juvenile. It goes through handgun, ammunition. Is that correct?
yes,
And then you look down at subsection 2, and it says it's unlawful for any person who is a juvenile to knowingly possess a handgun, ammunition, all those things. Is that right?
yes,
And then you get to subsection 3. And subsection 3 says this subsection does not apply to, and it lists a few areas that it doesn't apply. Is that right?
I'm not following you on
Okay,
this.
we'll start with A, which is right below 3. It's in that middle section. Do you see where I'm looking? I'll point on my copy.
Okay,
Subsection 3A says a temporary transfer of a handgun or ammunition to a juvenile or to the possession or use of a handgun or ammunition by a juvenile. And then it lists a few conditions under which that temporary transfer or possession may occur. Is that right?
yes,
And if you go down to, and it's kind of hard to read on the copy, I think, but the next little subsection is subsection I, it's a lowercase I.
okay,
And toward the end of that subsection I, it lists target practice or a course of instruction in the safe and lawful use of a handgun. Is that accurate?
yes,
So under federal law, it is not illegal for a minor to temporarily possess a handgun. Is that fair? Under certain conditions.
yes,
And parents come in and buy firearms for their children. Is that fair to say?
no,
So a minor cannot register a handgun. Is that fair?
yes,
And to your knowledge, Mr. Crumbley did not transfer title or possession to that handgun to a minor. Is that fair?
That's speculation, Judge. You can only testify to the actual transaction on November the 26th.
I asked to her knowledge.
She can testify as to what her knowledge is going on.
I'm sorry.
To your knowledge, Mr. Crumbley did not transfer possession or registration of that handgun to a minor. Is that fair? As far as you're aware.
No,
And based on your reading of the law and our review of it today, it wouldn't be illegal if Mr. Crumbley allowed his son to use a handgun at a shooting range. Is that fair?
in his company,
Correct.
yes.
Or to handle it while he's at home. Is that fair?
No,
I'm assuming you're also familiar with Michigan laws as they relate to handguns,
not all, no.
just mostly federal.
Some,
It was going to be specifically that Michigan laws are similar to federal laws as they relate to temporary possession for under certain conditions. But you're saying you don't know about that?
no, that's not what I'm saying.
So when the prosecutor shows you Exhibit 34, Exhibit 33, and Exhibit 35, about not buying a gun for anybody else, not transferring possession to anybody else, not giving handguns to minors, so long as a minor has a handgun or uses a handgun within the conditions prescribed by federal law, it's not illegal, is it?
No,
And again, to your knowledge, you're not aware of any time that James Crumbley allowed his son or a minor to use his handgun without his supervision.
correct.
To your knowledge, correct?
Right.
One moment, Your Honor. And I had one other question regarding, it might be a few questions, regarding this trigger lock statement that the prosecutor showed you. Actually, we're gonna go a little farther. Exhibit 36, I will clean this up for you. Exhibit 36 is the receipt for purchase, correct?
Yes,
That James Crumbley was purchasing the firearm.
yes,
And then this is the pistol purchase record, correct?
yes,
And this is typically what an individual would take to register their firearm. Is that fair?
yes,
And it has to be done within so many days, right?
correct.
And to your knowledge, that was done. Is that fair?
Yes,
And then the trigger lock statement. This is simply a statement that indicates that the trigger lock was provided with the handgun. Is that fair?
correct.
Okay, and you indicated that it was like a cable lock.
Yes,
Okay. So, to your knowledge, Mr. Crumbley used the cable lock. Is that fair?
Judge, on the form of the question, she cannot possibly testify to that. She can only testify that she gave the trigger lock.
That's fair, Your Honor. I'll change my question. You're not aware that Mr. Crumbley didn't use the cable lock. Is that fair?
I'm not aware.
I'm just gonna find the same
It's the
exact.
same.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Any questions about the Jennifer Crumbley?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Any read?
Just very briefly.
Ms. Back, as a federally licensed firearms dealer, you follow all the regulations from the ATF and other laws, is that correct?
Yes,
So and you can only testify to what actually occurred on November the 26th, 2021, right?
yes,
That's your entire involvement with this case.
yes.
Okay. So had James Crumbley walked in and said, hey, Ethan, is this the 9mm that you want? You wouldn't have sold it, right?
No,
Okay. It's nothing else.
You may step down.
thank you.
Testify next witness.
Ryan, can you call Sean Hopkins to the stand?
Any reason why this witness can be excused?
No, Your Honor.
No. Mr. Could please raise your right hand for me? Do you solemnly swear any testimony you're going to give will be the truth under the penalty of perjury?
Absolutely, I do.
If you please have a seat, I'm going to ask you to state and spell both your first and last name for the court recorder, please.
Would you like me to take my mask off?
If you feel comfortable, you can take your mask off.
My name is Sean Hopkins, ShawnHopkins.
Okay. You'll notice there's a few microphones sitting there. I'm going to ask you to make sure you keep your voice up and that you speak loudly and clearly, because we are, in addition to amplifying your voice, we are required to record all court proceedings. We will be required to respond verbally to any question. A shake of the head or or are not acceptable, okay?
Understood.
Okay, thank you. If you can, just scoot up a little bit closer to those mics.
May I proceed? Good afternoon, Mr. Hopkins.
Good afternoon.
If I ask you a question you don't understand, just let me know, or if you'd like me to repeat it, just let me know.
Okay,
Okay, can you tell the court what your occupation is?
I am a counselor
And where do you work?
at Oxford High School
How long have you worked at Oxford High School?
since 2015.
Can you tell the court what you did prior to that?
I was a youth pastor.
And how long did you serve as a youth pastor?
I was hired in 2009.
And can you tell the court about your education?
I have a master's in counseling through Oakland University. I graduated in 2015. I have an undergrad from Spring Arbor University, 2009, major in youth ministry, minor in psychology.
Okay, so you started at Oxford High School, and your current role right now is counselor.
Correct.
Did you ever serve in any other capacity in Oxford High School?
I was an intern in the 2014-2015 school year. In the 2015-2016 school year, I was the international student counselor before taking over a general caseload.
Okay, when you say a general caseload, what does that include? What are your duties?
I have averaged 400 students. I work with them on transitioning into high school, post-secondary transition, scheduling, social emotional well-being. It's a myriad of different roles.
Okay, when you say scheduling, what does that include?
As far as helping students with their classes that they are in, helping them pick appropriate classes based on their skill set, helping them pick classes that are going to help them in their career after high school.
And is that done every year or twice
That
a year?
is done once per year.
Okay, and you said you had 400 students on your caseload?
I have averaged 400 students during my time there, yes.
How many students are there at Oxford High School?
There is approximately 1,800 students within the building.
And how many counselors that do what you do?
We have 4 counselors that have a general caseload, 1 counselor that has an early college caseload.
I'm sorry, because what? I didn't hear what you said.
We have 4 counselors with a general caseload. We have 1 counselor who has students who are in the early college program.
You said you had an average of 400.
Correct.
Does that allow you to actually meet every student on your caseload?
The one time I generally get to meet every student is during counseling. If all I were to do is meet with students, I would have approximately 2.5 hours per student per year.
in addition though to the scheduling aspect, what else are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Quite a few things. We have general meetings that we have to do. We have general check-ins. This year, there's been times we've covered class periods with COVID, and
What does that mean, you covered class periods?
where we've actually checked in and given time, like during an advisory lesson or something like that, where we're in front of a classroom of students. We do educational development plans with students where we are in the classroom with a large group. We have presentations that we do for parents. We have professional development that we need to attend.
Okay, what circumstances generally give rise to you getting involved with a student that has nothing to do with scheduling, but might be from a teacher or somebody else?
Generally, it's a concern for a student's social emotional well-being, that there's some concern about a student not being well, or that we have a concern that a student might need some additional support that would be beyond the classroom environment.
And do you have anything to do with discipline?
I do not.
Okay. Can you tell the court what last year looked like for your role as a counselor in the high school?
Last year was difficult. We at Oxford started in person, but we were virtual for about 7 weeks during the school year, and student attendance was sporadic. Anytime a student was either COVID positive or was in close proximity to somebody who was COVID positive, they were quarantined. So it was not a typical school year of what we would have seen previously. It was an adjustment for the staff. It was an adjustment for the students. It was incredibly difficult.
And this year, before November 30th, what did the school year, was it more normal, or was it back to what you would consider normal?
I don't really know what normal would look like at this point from that, but I would say that we were in person with more regularity. We only had 2 days we were virtual. They were the 2 days before Thanksgiving, but student attendance was still low in general. We still had students missing school at a higher rate than we had previously seen.
Okay. Mr. Hopkins, do you know an individual by the name of Ethan Crumbley?
Yes.
And when did you first meet him?
He became on my caseload in the fall of 2020. The only memory I have of meeting him during his freshman year would have been when we did scheduling, and I do not remember that meeting specifically because we did them via Zoom. So I had approximately 3 grades worth of Zoom meetings with students in a 3-week period.
So you meet with all 400 students to schedule every year?
Aside from seniors, yes.
Okay. When was the next time after freshman year that you had any interaction with this student?
The only interaction I had previous to November 29th was I had received an email from a teacher that he seemed sad.
Which teacher was that?
Diana McConnell, his Spanish teacher.
And do you remember approximately what?
It would have been
month
early
that is?
November. And I had just what I would call a check-in. I waited for him outside of a classroom and said, hey, I heard you might be having a rough time. I'm here for you if you need to talk.
And what did he say?
He just looked at me, said, okay, and did not follow up with anything.
When was the next time you had any interaction with him?
The morning of November 29th.
And can you tell the court what that was?
There was an email sent to our Dean of Students and a Restorative Practices Coordinator that was then forwarded to me from an English teacher stating that the student had been looking at bullets on his phone in class. So
Go ahead.
So the student was called down to the office by a restorative practices coordinator who then called me to ask me to be in the meeting as social emotional support for the student.
And did you do that?
I did.
And do you know approximately what time that was?
It was approximately 9 in the morning on the 29th.
Okay. About how long did that meeting take place?
About 5 minutes.
And what was the student's demeanor?
Compliant, calm, understanding. I did not lead the meeting. I was just there in the meeting. But the student understood that it was not school appropriate behavior when that was discussed as the reason
How do
for
you know
being
that?
called down.
How do you know that he understood that?
He claimed that he understood that that was not school appropriate behavior.
Was he argumentative?
No,
Was he oppositional?
no,
Did you get any other information about that incident?
no other information about that incident.
Did he have any explanation as to why he was doing what he was doing?
He did. He stated that the previous weekend, mom and him went to a gun range and went shooting, that it was a hobby that they participated in, and he was researching regarding that hobby.
Okay. Before you attended that meeting, did you have any knowledge about his prior history with attendance, grades, behavior?
His attendance was good. He had missed one day of school during sophomore year. He was on track for graduation, had no behavior incidents reported at school.
Does the school document behavioral incidents?
They do,
How do they do that?
through log entries in our student information system.
Okay, and who has access to that information system?
Administration, counselors, dean, anybody with administrative access through our information system.
And as a result of that meeting, what, if anything, occurred?
Our restorative practices coordinator called home to leave a voicemail.
Were you there when she left the voicemail?
I was.
Okay, and that voicemail's already been entered into evidence. I believe it's Exhibit 9. And at some point, was he allowed to go back to the class?
He was.
All right, and did that meeting end in a negative way or a positive way?
It was not a negative way. I would say it was more positive, as in the student was understanding of the appropriateness of school behavior based on their response. And there was no necessary follow through after the meeting.
At that time, did you have any knowledge of, was there individual education plan for this student?
I had no knowledge of one.
Okay, and did you have any knowledge of any issues that were going on at home?
No,
Did you have any reports of him being bullied?
no.
When was the next time you had any interaction with this student?
The morning of November 30th.
And how did that occur?
I had received an email from a co-teacher in that English class stating that he was looking at a video on his phone. The video was of some sort of shooting. It was said in the email that it was not an actual event. When I met with the student, it was described as a video game.
Okay, we'll get there in a moment. About what time was that email?
That email was sent to me at 8:30. I saw it at 8:50.
Okay, and anything else occur after that?
Yes. Around the same time, the student had switched classes and was in his math class. That was when there was drawings done on his math assignment.
When was the first time that you were alerted to this math assignment?
Our dean of students came to my office around 9 a.m. To let me know that he had received a picture, actually had been shown a picture of a math assignment.
And did you see it at that time?
I had not seen the assignment at that time.
Okay, what if anything did you do next?
I went to the classroom to get him out of the classroom to have a meeting with him.
And when you greeted him, how would you describe his demeanor?
I didn't see much of a demeanor at the time. He
Okay.
was sitting in the front row of the classroom. So I just said, hey, we need to talk.
Okay, and what did you do after that?
I was standing with him. He stood up and followed me out of the class. I had grabbed the math assignment off his desk.
Okay. And you took him back to your office?
Back to my office where
Okay.
the dean of students was waiting.
All right. And tell the court what happened in that meeting.
We had a conversation regarding initially the email that I had received about the video.
So when you're talking about we had a conversation, you're talking about you and Deacon Crumbley?
Correct. So I had a conversation about the video to ask what it was, because the email was not overly descriptive as to what it was. And that's when he told me that it was of a video game. I never saw the video, so I had a description of it being a video game per the student and not an actual event per the teacher who had referred it.
Okay, so at the time that you brought the student into the room and had the meeting with him, you knew about the email and you had heard about this math assignment.
Correct.
And you had it in your hand.
Correct.
What was the purpose of bringing him into the office? Was it a violation of a school code? What was your role and why did you meet with him?
At the time, I did not know whether there was a violation of a school code or not, based on having not observed the drawing at the time. I did have concern about the student because it was a couple of messages in a couple of days, and the purpose of the meeting was to find out what our next steps would be.
And when you said you had concern, what was your concern?
My concern was that I wanted to make sure he was okay.
Okay. So what happened after he sat down? What did you tell him he was there for?
That we had to discuss an email I had received, and also we had to discuss his math assignment.
Okay. And how did that go?
At first, he was very similar to how he had been the previous day, compliant and understanding. With the email, he regarded it as a video game, stated that he had an interest in designing video games after high school. Then I put the math assignment in between the two of us. He sat across from me at my desk, and I said, I would like to go over some of this. He said that it was a video game drawing that he had done in relation to the pictures that were on the assignment.
At that time, there were two versions of that math assignment.
Correct.
Okay. Which version did you have?
I had the hard copy version, which had been doctored.
Okay. And that's exhibits.
Sorry, had been after?
Had been
Yeah, I'm going to
doctored.
show it, Your Honor. That's exhibit 78. Mr. Hopkins, is this what you saw at that time of the meeting?
Yes,
Okay. And you asked him about this exhibit 78?
I did.
And what was his answer?
His answer was initially that it was a drawing of a video game he wanted to design. I then asked him to explain some of the words that had been written on the drawing.
Like what?
One that I could read was "My life is useless," and so I wanted to ask, what does this mean? This does not sound like a video game.
Okay. And what did he say?
His demeanor then changed. He became sad.
And when you say he became sad, what did that look like? Why do you think he was sad?
He started pausing more in his speech. He then described some things that had happened recently in his life.
What were those things?
He talked about how a family dog had died. He talked about that he had lost a grandparent, that COVID had been incredibly difficult for him, that being out of school the previous year had been difficult for those virtual days. He talked about a friend who had left, that wasn't able to attend school anymore, had moved. And he talked about an argument about grades a previous night with parents.
With what?
With his parents.
Okay. What did you do next?
At that point, I determined that there was enough suicidal ideation based on his sadness and based on some of the words he had written on there that I called mom.
When did you see the other version of this worksheet, the original, which is Exhibit 7? Can you put that up on the screen?
The original was forwarded to me in an email, and I saw it approximately 20 minutes later
Okay, was it,
Later.
after seeing the original.
was it before you called parents or after?
I don't remember.
Okay. Let's talk, you said you were concerned about suicide ideation.
I was.
Okay. Can you tell the court what you consider and what you learned in your field is suicide ideation?
Suicidal ideation are thoughts, patterns, behaviors, feelings associated with suicide. Sadness, depression, negative self-talk, all of those themes that we see associated with suicide.
Is that the same thing as active?
It is not.
Actively suicidal? What
It
is
is
the
not.
difference?
Actively suicidal would contain a plan, a method, a date, action statements, something that he could take action on.
And how do you determine if it's ideation versus being actively suicidal?
Some of it is taking the information that you have in front of you. I also asked Ethan if he was a threat to himself or others.
So is this part of, you did a risk assessment?
Correct.
Okay, what is a risk assessment?
A risk assessment is looking to gain information on how the person in front of you is and what level of either suicide risk or self-harm risk they may display.
I know this social emotional duty is part of your job, but how often are you encountering a student that is either has suicidal ideation or actively suicidal?
As it has become much more frequent, especially in the past year. This year on my caseload, I've had 3 students make attempts.
You've had what?
I've had 3 students make attempts.
Okay. And did that occur, did you speak with, did this, Emily, similar assessments with those students, or you found out after?
It's been different for each one. One, I did have a very similar assessment.
Okay.
Sir, can you do me a favor, move a little bit closer? Your voice is kind of trailing at the end, so I'm missing.
It does trail at the end. All right. How many of these check-ins, like the one you did with this student, are you doing? Is this a frequent thing? Is this abnormal? Is it unusual?
It's becoming more common lately. I would state that it happens minimal, once or twice per month, in just a normal school year.
All right. And every one of those meetings, do you end up calling parents?
I do.
And what triggers a call to a parent?
When the student is a minor,
Yes.
when I have concerns about, that's my statement, when the student is a minor. When I have concerns that there needs to be follow-up mental health support for a student. When I have concerns that the student may potentially become suicidal.
Okay. So at some point you said you did call a parent. And
I did.
Who did you call?
I called mom.
Why did you call mom?
I always give students the choice of who they would like me to call. The student stated that mom would be easier to get a hold of.
What was his reaction or demeanor about you calling a parent?
He was very muted at that point. Almost, I would describe it as like resigned to the fact that I was going to call home.
Did he object?
No,
Did he ask you not to?
no.
Okay. Did you get a hold of mom?
I left a voicemail with mom.
And did she call you back?
She did eventually. In between the call back, I also called dad. I don't know whether the phone was answered or not. It was empty air when I called.
You did eventually speak to mom.
I did.
And when you spoke to her, was Ethan in the room?
He was.
Was the phone on speaker, or was it just you talking?
I put the phone on speaker.
Okay. And what did, by the way, do you see her anywhere in the courtroom today?
I haven't looked.
Could you look, please? Do you see, it's Jennifer Crumbley, correct? Do you see her in the
Correct.
courtrooom today?
Correct.
Can you describe what she's wearing?
I can just see her face. She has a gray mask, glasses.
Your Honor,
You might have to step aside a little bit. Can you describe the article of clothing that she's wearing?
Can I stand?
sure.
Gray stripes with white stripes in the shirt.
May the record reflect he's properly identified. Okay, thank you. What did Jennifer Crumbley say on speakerphone?
She wanted to talk to Ethan and ask what was going on. He gave a response of, I don't know, was kind of his response.
What did you tell Mom?
I stated that I was concerned about Ethan based on some of the time I'd had speaking with him and based on the assignment and information I had. I then sent a photo of exhibit, is it 78?
The second version?
The second,
Yes.
the second version to Mom.
Okay. And did Mom eventually have exhibit 7?
Yes, that was forwarded in an email.
Okay. And what did you ask Mom to do, if anything?
I asked her to please come to the school.
And what did she say?
She stated that she was at work and that she would try and get in touch with the dad.
Okay. And then what was your response?
I stated that I had tried calling dad and was unable to get a hold of him.
And what happened next?
We ended the phone call with her attempting to get a hold of dad.
And eventually, did you have another conversation with
I
Jennifer
did.
Crumbley?
I did. She called one more time to state that she was also unable to get a hold of dad, that she would be there, but it would be approximately a half hour.
Okay. So was it your impression that she wanted dad to come because she couldn't come, or that she wanted both of them to come? What did she say?
My impression was that she was hoping that dad would be able to come because she wouldn't be able to come.
Okay. But eventually she said she was coming.
Correct.
Okay. And who eventually showed up at the school?
Both Mom and dad.
How long approximately did that take? Do you know what time that they?
That they arrived?
Yes.
It was, I believe, around 10:30.
Okay. So you, in the meantime, where was Ethan?
He was with me. I didn't want to leave him alone.
Okay. What were you doing?
We had further conversations about some plans for him after high school. Typically, when a student is waiting for parents to arrive, it's a nerve-wracking time for the student. And I don't want them to be focused on that moment if I can help it.
Backing up just a little bit about the risk assessment. When did you conduct that with Ethan?
It was prior to calling Mom.
And what kinds of things did you ask him?
I asked him if he was a threat to himself or others. And his statement back to me was, I can see why this looks bad. I'm not going to do anything. I then asked him to describe some of the words and pictures that he had written on the sheets.
And what did he say?
He stated that the pictures were a video game, but when I asked him to go deeper into the words, he continued to display the sadness that we had discussed earlier of the friend not being able to attend school, dog dying, a grandparent dying.
Did you, when he said, I can see how this looks bad, I'm not going to do anything, did you stop there or did you ask him any more questions?
I asked him specific questions about what he had written. I did
Okay.
not ask any further questions about a plan.
Okay. And why not?
Because he stated that he was not a threat to himself or others.
Okay. When Mom and Dad arrived, let's back up. How many times approximately a year do you have a situation where you're concerned about a student's mental health and their safety and you call parents in?
12 to 15 per year.
Okay. And can you tell the court what happened when they arrived? Did you go get them or did somebody else?
I went to go get them in the counseling office lobby.
And who else was in that meeting?
the student was in that meeting, and then I also texted our dean to return for that meeting,
Okay, so who arrived first, the dean or the parents?
the parents.
Okay, and where were you when the parents entered the room? Were you in front of them or behind them?
I was in front of them.
Okay, and what happened when they walked in the room?
It was different than other meetings I've seen. Like
Why is that?
They weren't friendly or showing care to their student,
Did they, to their son?
to their son.
Did they greet him?
No,
Did they touch him?
no,
Did they hug him?
no.
Where did Jennifer Crumbley sit?
I have 3 seats in my office that are not mine. 2 directly across from me and 1 that's more off to the side.
So you're at a desk?
I'm at a desk.
You're behind the desk and there's 2
There would
chairs in
be
front?
2 seats across from me and then 1 that would not be far from where our judge is sitting.
So about how many feet?
I would say about 7 feet from me
Okay, where did Jennifer Crumbley sit?
in the seat further away,
And where did James Crumbley sit?
next to Ethan.
And what happened next?
I described why I was concerned about Ethan, that he had stated that he was not a threat to himself, but I had concerns about suicidal ideation and I had concerns about his well-being. I provided a list of resources of
Well, let's back up for a second. Did Jennifer or James ask any questions about what suicide ideation is?
not to my memory.
Okay, did they ask any questions at all before you talked about any mental health services?
Not to my memory.
Okay. Did you ask them for any input or did you ask them any questions?
Not at that point.
Okay, so what happened?
So I provided a list of resources of mental health supports and stated that though Ethan doesn't, though he states he's not a threat, that I am concerned about his well-being and that I am concerned that he needs somebody to talk to for mental health support.
And did you tell either one of them when that should occur?
I said as soon as possible, today if possible.
And what was the response?
That today was not an option because they had to return to work. My response
Just slow
was,
down for a second. Did both of them say that? Did one of them say that?
Mom said that.
Okay. And her exact words were what?
Today is not possible. We have to return to work.
And what did James Crumbley say?
I don't remember anything being said by him about it.
Did he say that he had to return to work?
Objection, Your Honor. The witness stated he doesn't know what James said.
Well, I'll rephrase. With regard to not being able to take Ethan that day, did James Crumbley ever say anything or object to what Jennifer Crumbley said?
He did not object to anything that Mom said.
Okay. And so has that ever happened before?
Objection, relevance.
It's relevancy.
The relevancy is I have to show that defendants were grossly negligent and did not have ordinary care or apply ordinary care. And whether or not this professional who has at least 12 to 13 meetings a year like this and asks parents to take this child, their son, for treatment or take them home, I think it's absolutely reasonable because it's my standard is an ordinary care.
Go ahead.
In any of your meetings, when you call parents because you have that kind of concern, have you ever had anybody say no?
I have never had parents arrive to the school and not take their student home.
If you tell them they need to.
Correct.
Okay. So what did you do?
I was a little bit taken aback by that. When parents stated that they could not take their student home that day, my statement was, I want him seen within 48 hours. I'll be following up.
Okay. Did you ask them to take him home or did you ask them to take him to get?
I asked them to take him to get therapy.
Okay. And what was the response when you said follow up you were gonna follow up and it needed to happen in 48 hours?
I would describe it as compliant of, okay. I didn't have a reason to believe it wouldn't happen. I didn't feel 100% confident that it would happen.
And what was your primary concern at that moment?
My primary concern was that Ethan would not be alone.
Why didn't you want him to be alone?
Because suicidal ideation, I don't want a student left alone.
Okay. Did the demeanor or lack of conversation or interaction with him by James and Jennifer, did it seem to have any impact on him?
Not different than I had seen previously with a generalized sadness. I would describe that was how he stayed throughout most of the meeting. His demeanor did not shift.
Okay. How long did the meeting last?
Less than 15 minutes.
In the entire meeting, did Jennifer Crumbley say anything to her son?
I don't remember her saying anything to her son.
Did James Crumbley say anything to his son?
Yes.
What did he say?
He was looking at the math assignment with his son and going over that you have people you can talk to. You have your counselor you can talk to. We talk. You have your journal.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we thought last. I didn't hear the last part.
You have your journal.
You have your journal.
All right. Had you heard anything about a journal before that?
I had not.
Had you seen a journal?
I had not.
Okay. What was the last thing? How did the meeting end?
Abruptly. I was asked by mom, are we done? Because at that point, the student had wanted to return to class. Parents had described that virtual learning was incredibly difficult for their son. And I then asked our dean if there was any disciplinary reason why a student could not return to class.
And what was his response?
No.
Okay. And Jennifer Crumbley stated before that conversation or after?
I believe it was after that conversation. Are we done?
Are we done? And what did you say?
I guess so.
And was Ethan present for that?
Yes.
Okay. So what did you do?
I then wrote Ethan a pass back to class. And I told him, I just want you to know I care about you.
I can't hear you.
I told him, I just want you to know I care about you.
Why'd you say that to him?
Because I care about my students, and I cared about him in that moment, particularly because I thought it was a really rough situation to be showing signs of needing help, of needing support. And it felt like he got the opposite when I tried to get him that help and support.
Did he ever cry?
No.
Did, when he got up and you said that to him, did he say goodbye to his parents? Did his parents say goodbye to him?
I don't remember them saying goodbye to him, no.
Did anybody hug him?
No.
Touch him?
No.
Did he say anything back to you when you said, I just want you to know I care about you?
No.
Okay. At some point then, did mom and dad leave right after, or did they stay and ask questions when he wasn't there?
There was about a minute of them just gathering things and going, but nothing.
Did you said you gave them something?
I provided a list of resources, of mental health resources in the community that they took with them.
Okay. Once he returned to class and once the meeting was over, what did you do, if anything, regarding Ethan after that?
I wanted him to not be alone. So I checked to make sure that he was being marked present for his classes.
How many classes after that?
He returned to his 3rd hour class. He went to his 4th hour class to lunch, finished his 4th hour class.
And how do you check to make sure he's there?
I get alerts for his attendance when teachers submit attendance.
Okay. Why did you check?
because I wanted to make sure he was never alone.
And what was your plan if that horrible event hadn't occurred?
I was going to follow up with him the next morning to make sure that there was follow-up on his mental health support.
Okay. One moment. Your Honor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any questions on behalf of Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good afternoon. Prior to coming into court today, did you meet with the prosecution regarding your testimony?
Yes,
Were you instructed on certain things you were not to talk about?
no,
Were you told to avoid any topics?
no,
Were you told any answers that were important for you to give?
no,
I want to go back to November 29th. That was the day before the school shooting. On that day, you said you received notice from an English teacher that Ethan was looking at bullets in class. Is that correct?
I was forwarded an email about that.
And that email was from who?
That email was from Jacqueline Kubina.
So Jacqueline Kubina told you that Ethan was looking at bullets in class, correct?
The email stated that, yes.
And with that, you spoke with Ethan about the bullets?
I was present for the meeting, yes.
Okay, and that meeting included who?
Pam Fine, Ethan, myself.
And Jacqueline Kubina or not Jacqueline Kubina?
No,
What was Pam Fine's role in the meeting?
she led the meeting.
Why is that? What does she do?
Restorative practices.
Explain to me what that means.
She is our anti-bullying coordinator, and she is a district-wide restorative practices is helping students resolve conflict and to help them maintain their time in the classroom appropriately.
Okay, so you ended up having a meeting with Pam Fine and Ethan regarding him looking up bullets in class.
Yes,
And as a result of that meeting, Ethan seemed to understand looking up bullets was not appropriate for school, correct?
yes,
And you and Pam discussed how a teacher brewing beer might not be appropriate to look up in class, but people can have hobbies outside of school that are not illegal, correct?
correct.
Were you present when Pam Fine left the voicemail for Jennifer Crumbley?
Yes,
And you know from listening to that voicemail being left, there was no request for Jennifer Crumbley to call back to you or Miss Fine.
I have not listened to the voicemail since that day.
What, as far as your recollection, can you tell us what you remember about that?
The voicemail?
Yes.
That she left a voicemail wanting to check in on what had happened with Jennifer Crumbley.
As far as you understood, did the voicemail request a call back from Jennifer Crumbley or not?
I do not know whether it did or not. If it did not, I would not find that unusual
Why is that?
because it was not a discipline issue.
You said that prior to November 29th and 30th, Ethan had good attendance, correct?
Yes,
No behavioral incidents at the school.
none.
He was on track to graduate.
Yes,
You had no reason to believe there was anything wrong with Ethan prior to your dealings with him on the 29th and 30th, aside from when he was sad when his dog died.
correct.
And the day that he was sad his dog died, you had a quick conversation with him to just let him know you were there if he needed you.
Correct.
And he didn't seem to take you up on that offer, but that also didn't cause you any concern, correct?
Correct.
You did not communicate with mom or dad regarding the day Ethan was sad about the dog dying, correct?
Correct.
You did not tell Jennifer or James, I am available to speak to Ethan if he's extra sad about the dog. There was no reason for you to call Jennifer and James about that, correct?
Correct.
And at the end of the discussion about the bullets, you felt that it had a positive ending. Is that correct?
I felt that he understood the conversation.
Okay, you felt he understood the conversation and he appreciated that he should not be looking at bullets in school.
He stated that he understood that, yes.
So the next day, you said you got an email that you received at 8:50. It was sent at 8:30. And it was about a teacher complaining Ethan had been looking at a video on a phone of a shooting, correct?
The teacher stated that the video was not an actual event and that he was watching it on his phone. Yes.
You never saw the video.
I never saw the video.
So you only know what you've heard people tell you about it. You don't know if it was an actual event, if it was a video game, a cartoon. You have no idea, correct?
I have what was reported to me, correct.
Did you ask to see the video?
I did not.
And when you got the message, the email about the video, who did that come from?
Allison Karpinski.
Allison Karpinski. So Allison Karpinski is a separate teacher from the teacher the day before when there was the issue with the bullets.
They co-teach the same class.
But they're separate people, correct?
Correct.
So Ms. Karpinski made you aware of the video that you did not see. Was it at that time that you spoke to Ethan? Or was it after you heard there was some drawings on a math paper?
They occurred around the same time.
So close in time, you heard about Ms. Karpinski's complaint that he was looking at a video that involved some kind of a shooting, and you heard from the math teacher that he had drawn some problematic things on a math assignment or test.
I did not hear from the math teacher. That was reported to our dean,
Okay.
but they were around the same time.
Did it come to your attention around the same time?
Within 10 minutes, yes.
Within 10 minutes. And that claim involved a third teacher. It was not Ms. Karpinski or the teacher from the day before, her co-teacher. Which teacher was it that brought about the math issue?
Becky Morgan.
So at that point, you would agree with me that you knew what Ms. Morgan told you.
I never spoke with Miss Morgan.
Did you saw the two drawings from the math assignment or test?
Not at that point.
Not at that point, but you were aware there was a drawing that existed. What were you aware of?
In regards to which part, I'm not understanding what you're asking.
Miss Morgan, the information she had, what were you aware of with regard to math?
I was aware that the student was in the math class and that there was some drawing on an assignment.
Okay, and did you ever get a copy of the drawing?
I grabbed it off his desk.
Okay, so you grabbed it off of his desk, and at that point, you decided to get Ethan out of class so you could meet with him. Is that correct?
Yes,
And you took him you took him down to your office. Is that correct?
correct.
So at that time, you knew about the drawing on the math paper.
Yes,
You knew that the math teacher had complained that there was a drawing or brought it to someone's attention, correct?
I knew it was brought to someone's attention. Yes,
Okay. You knew that Ms. Karpinski had brought it to your attention that Ethan was watching a shooting or a video on his phone, correct?
yes,
The video you never saw.
correct.
And you knew that from the day before, there had also been the incident where Ethan was caught looking at bullets in the classroom.
Yes,
All of those things combined together you were obviously concerned about Ethan and wanted to speak with him, correct?
yes,
So when you took Ethan to back down or to your office, you testified that you didn't know if there was a discipline issue. Can you explain that?
the items on the surface do not necessitate discipline.
So students are allowed to watch videos of shootings while in class?
I did not know what the content of the video was, and I wanted to make sure that I was with somebody who could get a complete picture of what was going on.
And you never asked to watch that video?
I did not.
And looking up bullets online, students are allowed to use their phones to Google things while they're in class?
Phone policy is class by class.
Okay. Is there ever a class where looking at bullets would be acceptable?
That is why we had the conversation about school appropriate behavior.
So the following day, when the video popped up in the math paper, you still did not know if there was a discipline issue for you to consider?
I do not do discipline, so I was with somebody who could help make that differentiation. At that
And-
time, I did not know.
And the person you're talking about is Mr. Ejak, correct?
Yes,
students.
yes,
Now, at this point, you said your main concern was to make sure Ethan was okay. Is that correct?
at what time?
At the time that you were aware of these incidents and you brought Ethan down to your office, you were concerned that you wanted to make sure he was okay.
Yes,
Okay, explain, tell me about this assessment, the suicide assessment. I don't know anything about it. Is that a tool you've been trained to use? Where did it come from? Tell me about how that works.
It's a compound question, so if you could just take one at a time.
Sustained reflex.
Can you tell me how it works?
how the suicide assessment works?
Yes.
It's a series of questions to gain information from the student.
And the series of questions, is it written out on a form?
No,
Where does the series of questions come from?
through training.
What kind of training?
I have a master's in counseling.
Are there specific questions you ask?
Yes,
Is there a protocol that there are specific questions that must be asked?
the question that must be asked is, are you a threat to yourself or others?
And when you ask the question, are you a threat to yourself or others? You take the answer they give as true?
I am not a mind reader.
So in this case, you took the answer as true.
Yes,
You are aware that teenagers will lie to get out of trouble, correct?
yes,
You're aware that teenagers can lie at any time about anything, correct?
Your Honor, I'm gonna object to the relevance. I'm not understanding where counsel's going. There's no criminal legal theory that would make this relevant. Particularly if I'm not sure, it seems she's making an argument that if her clients are guilty, that Mr. Hopkins might be too, but they weren't similarly situated. And so I don't know whether a teenager lies is relevant to this, in this proceeding.
What's the relevancy?
It goes to his state of mind in terms of what happens next in his steps to meet with Jennifer and James. Because he's using the answers that he's given from Ethan to make decisions about what to do next.
I'm gonna allow you to answer the question. Go ahead.
can you repeat the question, please?
So my question was, you are aware that teenagers can lie?
Yes,
And when you ask them a question like, are you a threat to yourself or anyone else, you have no way to know whether the answer you're getting is actually true, correct?
that is true, correct.
When you reviewed the math paperwork, you saw concerning material on there, such as the thoughts won't stop, the world is dead, my life is useless, correct?
Yes,
And did you ask Ethan about each of those statements?
yes.
What was his explanation about those statements?
That was when he started getting into his reasons for being sad.
Okay. And you believed that he was also working on some kind of, or planning to be a video game designer, is that correct?
He stated that, yes.
And you would agree with me, though, that video game design doesn't explain these sad thoughts and my life is useless, the world is dead, correct?
Yes,
You ended up calling over to mom first to ask that mom or dad come up and meet you at the school, correct?
yes,
And mom, you understand mom works about an hour away from the school.
okay.
Do you know that? Or if you don't know that, that's okay.
She stated that she worked in West Bloomfield.
Okay. And are you aware that dad was working locally as a DoorDash driver in the Lake Orion vicinity?
I was not aware at that time.
Okay. So mom originally was going to send dad, but in the end, both mom and dad ended up coming to the school, correct?
Yes,
And when mom and dad came into the school, you had a conversation with them about what we see here written on this math work, correct?
yes,
And you talked to them about the video that Ethan was caught watching,
yes,
and you told the parents that you had done an assessment to determine if he was a threat to himself or others, correct?
I told the parent that I believed he was a threat to himself in spite of his statement.
You believed he was a threat to himself despite his statement.
Yes,
And you say that Jennifer and James wanted to leave him in school. Isn't it true that you gave them the option to take him home?
absolutely not.
I'm sorry, say that
That I
again?
gave them the option.
To stay in school or go home?
I did not provide options. I provided the recommendation that he gets help as soon as possible today, if possible.
Okay. If you thought it was inappropriate for Ethan to stay in school that day, you could have said he has to leave, correct?
I could have stated that, correct.
There are kids who get in trouble for things and get sent home, and they have to leave the school and go home, correct?
When discipline is involved, correct.
There are kids who vomit at school and have a temperature, and when that happens, they have to
Objection, Your
leave
Honor, Your
school.
Honor. How is vomiting in school relevant to the gross negligence of Jennifer and James Crumbley?
I'm showing that there's circumstances and
I'll
certainly
stipulate there's circumstances where kids
circumstances
go home from school sick.
where this witness is testifying that he didn't give an option, he didn't have an option and that this child stayed in school. There absolutely had to have been an option because the school wouldn't let you stay if staying wasn't an option.
I'll let you answer that one question and you need to move on.
Okay, so ultimately, you did not take a firm position. Ethan needs to go home from school.
Correct.
You did not go to Mr. Ejak, the dean of schools, and say, Ethan needs to go home from school. You make him go home, correct?
Correct.
When you spoke to Jennifer and James, they expressed parental concerns about COVID was rough. It was hard on his schedule. Ethan was a part of this conversation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you also didn't like or wouldn't like the idea of Ethan being alone at home, correct?
Correct.
So Ethan was allowed to stay in school
Yes.
and he went back to class.
Yes.
And during this meeting that you had I should say prior to the meeting, or maybe during, you can let me know which it is. There was a point where Mr. Ejak went to Ethan's classroom to retrieve Ethan's backpack. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Ejak brought Ethan's backpack to Ethan in your office.
Yes.
And that backpack was something that Ethan was telling you he wanted because he wanted his chemistry work. Is that correct?
Incorrect.
How did Ethan explain why he wanted the bag?
Ethan did not request the backpack.
So was it your idea or Mr. Ejak's idea to go get the backpack?
The backpack was not even a conversation at that point. The backpack was retrieved because classes were changing and we would not leave it in a class for new students.
Okay, so you guys retrieved the backpack, brought it to the office to Ethan, correct?
I did not retrieve the backpack, but it was brought back to the office,
I'm sorry
correct?
about that.
It was brought back to the office.
Mr. Ejak retrieved it and brought it to your office.
Yes.
And at no time did you look in Ethan's backpack, correct?
Correct.
And at no time did you see Mr. Ejak look in Ethan's backpack.
Correct.
You testified and briefly mentioned a journal, and I missed it in your testimony on direct. Were you aware there was a journal in the bag?
No.
Were you aware that Ethan had a journal?
No.
What was your testimony about the journal? You said something about it on direct that I couldn't hear.
Dad mentioned a journal as a place where Ethan could write.
Okay. Did you ask, when you heard that, Ethan if he had a journal?
No.
If Ethan uses a journal when he's upset or a place he can write, you would agree with me that looking at the journal would give you more information about whether Ethan was stable and able to stay in school or not.
Yes.
And you did not ask if you could see Ethan's journal, correct?
Correct.
And you're aware now that the firearm, that the gun was found in Ethan's bag at the time you were meeting with him. Are you aware of that?
I am not aware of where the gun was.
If the gun was in his bag and you had opened his bag, you would have seen a gun, correct?
I don't know.
Did you make any effort to go through, to find out what Ethan did have in the bag?
No,
You made no effort to see the video that Ethan had been watching?
no,
Did you make any effort to look at what kind of websites he was on with those bullets?
no.
You testified that you knew there was an issue with Ethan's friend being out of school. Did you get any information about what that was about? I think you testified you didn't even know how old the other student was, correct?
I did not know the other student.
In terms of collecting information, we can agree there's a lot of information you did not ask about or collect.
In regards to Ethan,
Yes.
there is information I did not know, correct.
You understand that you are a mandatory reporter, correct?
Correct.
What does that mean?
It means that I am alerting people who are in charge of the student of what needs to happen, and that in the event of abuse or neglect, I'm alerting Child Protective Services.
You're aware that if you have a reasonable suspicion a child is being abused or neglected, you must report it to Child Protective Services within a certain amount of time.
Correct.
In this circumstance, after everything you described about mom and dad, you did not file a 3200 form with Child Protective Services alleging that there was a suspicion mom and dad weren't getting improper medical attention.
I did not.
Failing to get a child proper medical attention, even psychological attention, is grounds for you to file a 3200 form with CPS, correct?
Correct.
And in this case, you did not see any reason to file one and did not file it.
Correct.
And when you talked to the parents, you told the parents you had done your assessment and Ethan was not a threat to himself, or I'm sorry, to other students, correct?
I stated that he was a threat to himself.
And you said it would be fine for him to get into counseling. You wanted it within 48 hours, correct?
I stated I wanted it as soon as possible, today if possible. When today became not an option, I said 48 hours.
And again, we agree, you allowed Ethan to go back to class and your intention was to check up on him in 48 hours to see that he had been put into therapy.
My intention was to check up on him in the morning to make sure that process was taking place.
I've got quite a bit more because I have to go through his interview still.
We're gonna break for lunch right now. We'll come back at 1:15.
1:15, George.
1:15.
Thank you. Is it okay if we leave things in the courtroom?
And we'll take that.
Okay, thank you.